Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that will help you perform better, feel better, and live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, how are you, E.C.?
Well, it's Friday for us, so...
That's true. So it's Friday somewhere,
yeah.
Maybe. I think that's a saying.
I don't think
it's
that's
5 o'clock
actually
somewhere.
true.
It should be Friday somewhere because that's not
I think
true.
that's always possible, but...
I'm going to write a country song. It's called It's Friday Somewhere. It's going to be a hit. All right. So as we teed off last week, we've got a Quick Bites. We've got another Quick Bites. We did this last week. We're doing it again today because we've got some great questions, great fitness-focused questions that we wanted to tackle. So this time around, we've got questions about weight loss strategies for active individuals, training for endurance events, tips for improving running speed, heart rate training and its applications, the accuracy of VO2 max readings from heart rate monitors, and the latest research on fat spot reduction. Very important. Cool. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody who sends us these questions, by the way. I love them.
Yes.
All right. This first one's from Amanda. She says, I'm overweight, technically obese woman in my mid-40s. I am very active. I swim 4 times a week, do strength training 1 to 2 times a week. My job is also very active. I am currently training for some long distance open water swim races, the longest of which is a 10K swim. I don't pay too much attention to my weight. I eat fairly well, could be better, but I am obviously exceeding my caloric limit based on my weight. But I really would like to lose some weight, ideally starting at about a 10% drop. Am I going to be limiting my performance by limiting my caloric intake? I'm not talking about huge deficit, but enough to lose weight. Can I lose weight while training for optimum performance?
So I think so, meaning I think you can lose weight while training for performance, even optimal performance in this scenario. So when we look at elite athletes in most sports, they truly have optimized their strength to body weight ratio. You know, the Olympics were relatively close in time. You know, I was just watching a lot of the track athletes and the sprinters, and they're really lean. They're really lean. I mean, this definitely can border on unhealthy for some. I'm sure we all know that, especially on the women's side of the house, eating disorders are very common in running sports, and I don't recommend that. But the reason why these athletes really trend towards lean is that extra weight just simply slows them down. And another example, this is also why these athletes, while they will do some resistance training, some cross training, they certainly do not have the upper body development of games athletes. It's, again, just too much muscle to haul around. So these track athletes or these endurance athletes, we could pick swimmers too, because that's Amanda's interest. They are strong, but they're only strong enough to maximize their running or their swimming at their specific distance. But regardless, it's very little body fat because that just adds extra resistance for them. Now, I would never take an Olympic athlete who's about to go do, I don't even know, do they do the Olympic swimming 10K? I don't even know what the distances they do at the Olympics for swimming, but I wouldn't take one of them and purposely put them in a caloric deficit heading into their peak training before the games. Certainly, there's probably some Olympic sports where there's weight classes where they might have to do some cutting and blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, the issue here with really peak optimum training is if they're going to lose, it better be because the other person's better or because their technique breaks down, not because they didn't eat enough sweet potatoes, right? Like we do not want them to have something like food and energy around being the limiting factor when it's something that we can really control. So we're really trying to maximally fuel a competitive athlete, of course, without them gaining weight. But what does that mean for Amanda? I think because she indicated that she's overweight, we have to understand that even though she might not be, quote, optimally fueled because of the caloric deficit, that there will be some performance improvements simply by losing weight. I know, I lose 3 pounds. I'm like, let's go do pull-ups. I'm like, let's do it. Let's test max pull-ups today. You know what I mean? And so in cases where the strength to body weight ratio is not yet optimized, we can't forget that maybe this caloric deficit, you might not feel like you can go as intense as you did previously in some of your sessions. But of course, we're going to mitigate that with the mild deficit. But we might be picking up some really big performance gains by way of the weight loss. And I certainly have seen that with clients. And we definitely see that in CrossFit, that in a caloric deficit, they still see performance improvements because 10 pounds lost is huge when you're talking about now carrying that extra weight over 10 kilometers, right? Of course, I love that she said mild deficit, 10% deficit, depends on what our intake is, might be able to push it up a little bit higher, but 10% deficit keep the protein high enough, which 0.7 grams per pound of her target weight is going to be plenty high enough to retain that muscle mass loss. And I think the trade-off will be worth it. Again, this would not be the strategy of somebody who, let's say, does not have extra weight to lose. Now, if her 10K swim performance is next week, we're not gonna start this now. This would be something, especially if the 10K swim is more of a fun thing, or more that it's like several weeks away and we have some time to adjust and feel it out, then go ahead and get started, right? But we're not gonna mess with our diet, a week out from a competitive event.
Got it. All right. Next question is from Bonnie. How to improve running speed would be helpful. I've been focused more on lifting for a few years, and I'm getting back into running after having a baby and am so slow. And she said so with 3 O's. So that's how slow she's being. So slow.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have to start with the obvious disclaimer. I'm not a running coach. So, I'm not the professional running coach here. I'm a licensed nutritionist, but I certainly like to run and understand some concepts. The short answer is going to be, to get better or faster running speed, is that you have to do more workouts that are focusing on speed. Like it's really the answer to a lot of questions in fitness. Like, how do I get more pull-ups? You have to do more pull-up training. How do I get faster at running? You have to do more fast running workouts, which sounds snarky, but it's if I'm bad at any skill, and this is true in life as well, you actually just have to work on the skill. Now, I think the question is, okay, great. Well, how exactly would I carry that out? This is where I think interval style workouts are great. By shortening the distance, we can then increase our speed than what we could do right now. Like, maybe she's going out for a 5K and it's like, okay, with instead, maybe we'll do 10 sprints, 200 meters each. And she's going to see that she can hold a faster speed for 200 meters than she can for the 5K. And then, of course, over time, you want to be able to say, okay, whatever that speed is over the 200 meters, I'd like to now be able to hold it over 300 meters and 400 meters, and gradually be able to increase the duration for which I can hold that speed. And so these intervals are really great. They're going to help develop the cardio capacity, but they're also going to help the form and technique in these really small, bite-sized chunks, like quick bite, if you will, versus just trying to go out and improve your 5K time by running more and more 5Ks. And so I would just encourage, pick a distance that you are interested in. Maybe it's a 5K, maybe it's a 10K, and just Google interval training for improved 5K times, something like that. And I'm sure you're going to find a bevy of programs that you can follow. And I know we get lost in which one's better? Again, it's more about the concept of doing some of this interval training and your consistency and your effort in the intervals than it is that you found the most blessed, perfect program, especially for us at the non-professional level. You can make huge gains up to very competitive times without getting in the weeds of the perfect program for Bonnie. I will say I would try to find a program that has some variety of intervals. Again, I wouldn't want you to do a 5K training program where all of your intervals are just 1K repeats or something like that. Find some really short stuff, the 10 by 100 meters, find some of the 4 by 400s, because those are testing you across different ranges. They're really going to work your heart rate more, or sprint and power, and some of them are going to make you work on form and technique a little bit more, and all of that stuff is great. Also, with the intervals and the ability to kind of challenge yourself, which is always the reoccurring theme when we're talking about exercise, is you really do have to give yourself appropriate rest periods. I think this can be easy to overlook with weightlifting. I think it can be easy to overlook with sprint training. That if, let's say, you're doing 4 by 400 meters, you really need 3, easily 5 minutes between the 400 meter efforts, such that you're truly rested and able to hit the next 400 meter just as hard as the first one. And if you don't do that, you end up having just basically you ran a mile for time, which is not the same stimulus at all as the 4 by 400. And so this also means, and I know we talked about this with the last fitness quick bites, is for interval training, you also have to warm up. I mean, if you just go blasting out at your max 400 meter pace, you're probably going to pull a hamstring. So you got to probably warm up 5-10 minutes of some running or some high knees and all of that stuff. Make sure you're really primed. Try maybe a 50-70% effort, and then get started on your interval training so that you can really get after that stimulus of raising your running speed.
Got it. All right. Next question is from Anne. Can you talk about heart rate zone training? Seems like it's becoming more of a quote unquote thing, but I'm used to CrossFit style. Go as hard and fast as you can every day.
Yeah. So heart rate training, of course, we're targeting a certain heart rate. And there's basically 5 zones that are based on a percentage of your max heart rate. Now, your max heart rate you can figure out very generally off the cuff by the number 220 minus your age. So if someone's 40, their max heart rate is probably 220 minus 40 or 180 beats per minute. So then it's taking that 180 beats per minute and looking at percentage of that to divide into 5 different zones, where 50 to 60% of that would be zone 1, 60 to 70% of that would be zone 2, 70 to 80 zone 3, 80 to 90 zone 4, 90 to 100 zone 5. So the aerobic zone is really zone 2. That's that 60 to 70% of max heart rate. And then anything higher than that is going to put us in that anaerobic zone, more classic of the traditional CrossFit Metcons that everybody thinks about. And I think that Anne is alluding to. And again, we have to remember there's value to all of it. There is value to zone 2. It's where you're going to be able to go longer. It's where you're going to develop this endurance capacity. We're going to develop more of the stamina capacity. But there's also value to the zone 4 and zone 5. As we mentioned, it's going to help develop strength capacity, speed, power. What you can do in zone 5, you cannot hold that pace for zone 2. And so this is why we like to have varied training, because we get different adaptations depending on the type of training that we're doing. Now, there are, I think Anne mentioned, it seems like it's all the rage. There's all these various trends that come around a bunch. But I do think from an intensity point of view, I do think CrossFitters could do, quote, more zone 2 training. Now, the truth is, if you really look at classic CrossFit programming, it includes zone 2. What would zone 2 be? It could be the run 5K. It could be the run 10K. It could be the row 10K. But those are normally the days that when people see that on CrossFit.com, they're like, oh, I'll just do Fran.
Yep.
I'll just do Helen today instead. It tends to be, just like I mentioned, that people often will skip the heavy day workouts. They often will also skip what would kind of be a classic zone 2 workout. And so if you are in that place where you think CrossFit is only these 10-minute, 5-minute, 20-minute efforts, then yeah, you, quote, need more zone 2 training. Although, again, I think CrossFit has some of that stuff built in. We just don't always do it because we don't want to do it. So yeah, go for a 10K run, do a 10K row, make sure that you have these long durations in there. Now, what I will add on is I don't think that focusing on heart rate is as valuable as still focusing on performance when you go to do these longer efforts. Meaning, let's say that you go do a 10K run. I wouldn't want you looking at your watch being like, okay, am I at 60 to 70 beats per minute? Instead, I would go for a 10K run and see how long it takes you. And the next time you go for a 10K run, you try to at least hit that time, if not a little bit better. You will find that your intensity in that 10K run is certainly lower than what it feels like when you're doing Fran. But there is value in trying to improve your time in a 10K run, because that is going to make you kind of a faster, stronger athlete overall. So don't worry so much about the heart rate. Instead, focus on the true performance metric, and that you will find that over time, you want to keep seeing improvements, even though it's longer. It's just going to be at a lower intensity than, again, the CrossFit Metcons.
All right. Next question is from Daz. How accurate are HR monitor-based VO2 max readings? And to increase my VO2 max, is steady state best or hit? The goal is to reach a realistic/good level for my age.
Yeah, I think it's a great follow-up to the last question. Yep. And so VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen a person can use during intense exercise. And the oxygen, in combination with our macronutrients that we eat, predominantly carbs and fat, is how we create energy. And then we breathe out carbon dioxide. And so VO2 max is really most classically measured in a lab, because we have to wear this mask. So it's like how much oxygen is going in and then how much carbon dioxide is coming out. And typically when we see this measured, the person's running on a treadmill. It sounds terrible. You're on a treadmill, you've got a mask on, and they keep increasing the intensities until you keep increasing the speed until you can't keep up. I mean, not a fun test, right?
Yep.
So that's going to be the most accurate way to do it. But Daz has kind of pointed out here that he's got this heart rate monitor that's also telling him what his VO2 max is. And what they're doing is they're basically taking your age, they're basically taking the speed at which you're moving, and they're estimating their VO2 max. It's not going to be as accurate as actually measuring the gas exchange, but from what I can see online, it's pretty good. It's around 5, it can be within 5%. I'm sure it varies with devices, but seems like it's actually a pretty good correlate to what your VO2 max would be. Now, the second question would be, is steady state or HIIT better, high intensity interval training better, to improve that VO2 max? And the answer is yes. We're back to the fact that varied exercise has varied adaptations, all of which we want. So HIIT will improve the ceiling or improve the capacity of your heart rate to be able to pump more blood, do it faster, all of that great stuff, where then when you have the steady state stuff, it allows you to keep doing that pace for a longer period of time. And so this is why I kind of said in that last question that even when you go long, quote, steady state, you still want to have some effort there because you still want to see that you are pushing the pace at which your cardiovascular system can work. You're not just sort of mailing it in, so to speak. So that's kind of the answer for DAS, is I would keep the training varied to improve that VO2 max, include some shorter sprint stuff, include some longer stuff. And when you include the longer stuff, you're trying to still increase the pace at which you do them over time. But I think the bigger thing here for DAS is, assuming the goal is really just general overall fitness, I would be less interested in what my VO2 max is and more interested in some what I would consider performance benchmarks. Instead of worrying about my VO2 max, I would pick deadlift, max deadlift as one. The second one might be a mile run or a 5K run if you prefer. And then the third one might be max pull-ups. Now, do they have to be those three? No, but I think there's some nice variation of upper and lower body strength, as well as cardiorespiratory endurance. I think those are three great ones. And then what I would do is see where I fall relative to my age and my sex. And maybe try to be at an intermediate capacity, which I think is doable for people, if not in more of an advanced level, depending on your level of training and interest, right? Now, I was just poking around online. I saw the websites, I think it's strengthlevel.com. It's pretty cool. You can pick all these different exercises. You can see what it is for men, women, beginner, medium, advanced. I wouldn't say that I would say it's perfect in all categories, but it's plenty accurate enough to get a sense of, hey, where am I relative to what I should be for my age and my sex? And then another website was like runninglevel.com, will tell you kind of mile times for the same kind of breakdown, as well as 5K times. I think that's way more useful than just chasing VO2 max, because those are really the metrics that are going to play out in the quality of your life, like how you're able to keep up with the grandkids or travel or do any other activities versus necessarily the VO2 max.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, because that echoes what you said in the last answer, which is like the heart rate or the zone you're in, focus less on that than the performance. The VO2 max, focus less on the actual number and what you can do with it and how you can improve that thing that you're aiming to do, right? Because I think it's really easy to get so focused on, in this case, a number or a zone, that you forget that it's not, the point of it is not to hit a certain zone. The point of it is to, be healthier, fitter, perform better.
Yeah, I mean, I see this time and time again, and some of it's because we're all in like this tech world. We have our phones, and we love our devices, and we love our numbers. And in fact, of course, with my masterclass, they're looking at, well, it tells me that my app says I'm burning this many calories. And I'm like, stop looking at it. Like, what's happening in real life? And in real life, we have to look at your body weight. Or in this case, we want to know how fast you're running a mile or how many pull-ups you can do. This heart rate training, the VO2 max stuff, it's all correlates, but it's really not what you're after. So we have to just always check in with those concrete numbers, which I know are probably less immediate and less sexy, but that's what we're really after.
Last question we've got is from Andy. Do you think fat spot reduction, given new studies in 2023, are worth a shot? There is some growing research from 2017, 2021, and now 2023 suggesting as much. Clearly not as important as nutrition, but maybe worth a shot to add an abs plus cardio day or two after weight is controlled for to help with modern vanity. I like that he admitted that at least he's aiming for some vanity. Let's not screw around here.
Yeah, and Andy sent me some of these studies, which admittedly I hadn't really been tracking on or seeing. So thank you for that, Andy. No. I will say I kind of didn't want to tackle this one. I was like, oh, interesting. Oh, man. I think this is one of these things where we can really lose the forest for the trees. So spot reduction is this idea of like, okay, I'm going to go do more crunches and all of a sudden I'm going to lose belly fat, right? Or if I'm going to go do quad extensions and all of a sudden I'm going to lose fat off my legs. And so generally what you hear in the media, I'm sure what I've even said, is that spot reduction doesn't really exist. And there has been some interesting research that Andy hit the nail on the head that maybe we can actually do some targeted training. And he sent me those studies, as I mentioned. Now, I do want to be clear. He said it in his question, but this is kind of why I didn't want to tackle this. It's not as important as being in a caloric deficit. That if you want to lose fat and look better in the mirror, the first thing, even in light of these studies that he sent me, was being in a caloric deficit. And what's tough about some of the research that looks at spot reduction is that caloric deficit can, of course, happen with nutrition, but it also can happen with exercise. So if you take people who are doing, let's say, cardio, they're just going to the gym and they're running 4 days a week, but one of the groups decides to add abs after, that group is going to end up burning more calories because they've simply added more workout volume. And so they might conclude, oh, wow, my ab routine really helped my abs specifically pop. When in reality, it's like, well, you just created a greater caloric deficit and you lost more fat. So we have to stay focused on the fact that the first thing you have to do to lose fat from any area of your body is create a caloric deficit. Now, what he did send me in one of the studies I was looking at specifically, and it's really interesting to what they did, is they were able to equate the calories burned between different types of sessions, and they did find that spot reduction did exist. So they were able to match the calories that burned in, let's say, again, this workout of people just running or people just running now with also abs. How did they do that? Well, the people who were just running, they either had to run at a faster speed or they had to run a little bit further, such that their caloric burn would actually equal what the people who also had in the ab routine did. And what they found was that both groups lost the same amount of fat, but the ab group did actually lose a little more of that fat around their trunk than just generally on their body. And so what we think of why this might occur or where this could be beneficial is because when you do some targeted work on a certain body part, it will start to mobilize the fatty acids around those muscles because they're the working muscles. But the kicker then, of course, is we still need to have that caloric deficit such that those mobilized molecules actually get used. And that's really the kicker that a lot of people are going to overlook. And you're going to lose maybe potentially slightly more fat in that area than the total body loss than we see. And so I think the application of this is going to be extremely limited. You're going to have somebody who is already quite lean because, again, you're still going to lose body fat from everywhere. It just might be a slightly higher fraction of that in a specific area. And so I would say that unless you're already kind of in fitness or elite ranges of body fat, say less than 12, less than 10% for men, less than 16% for women, that you're not going to have any noticeable difference because of this versus just losing fat. Your nutrition has to be 100% dialed in. We have to know exactly that you're in a caloric deficit, that you have been losing weight. And then you probably also want a really specific aesthetic goal, like my abs need to be more visible because I have a bodybuilding competition coming up. And so it really would be that category of people that are about to get on stage for a physique competition, or they may consider tweaking some of their training to maybe add some resistance training or a high effort around a specific body part, and then you do cardio in hopes that their abs look slightly better for the judges. Mm-hmm. The relevance to our audience is virtually zero. Maybe I have some physique people listening. I would be surprised, but it's virtually zero. And overwhelming results are going to be found for people by first just getting in a caloric deficit, which is a big hurdle for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Do people, I know nothing about spot reduction, big surprise. Do people try to do that with nutrition generally speaking, or is that always done when somebody says like, hey, I've got this magic spot reduction plan? Is it always in the gym? Is it always fitness and, abs and, 8-minute abs or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how people think about it. It's like, oh, I want to get, great glutes. So I'm going to do just glute training. And great
and
glutes.
That's a good name for a program. I could sell that.
Here's the thing. If you want bigger biceps, you are going to have to train the arms. But some of what makes your biceps look bigger is the loss of fat around them. And the loss of fat is going to come down to the caloric deficit. Certainly, I can get greater bicep hypertrophy by simply training more biceps. Like if I just keep training my legs, my arms won't necessarily get bigger. But a lot of what people want is the visual, of course, aesthetic side of it, which means just by getting bigger bicep muscles, you aren't necessarily ripped. You have to get lean. And the leanness component of that comes down to the caloric deficit.
Got it. All right. What's the best way to get questions into a future Quick Bites episode, assuming we do more of them, which I think
some of these were actually just from an Instagram post. So that was,
there you go.
That was some of it. But for the most part, if you really want them in the official queue, responding to any of the emails that I send out, click reply, and that's how they go in the queue. I actually have a tag in a folder, so there is some sort of method to the madness, and that's at optimizemeenutrition.com/email if you're not already on my email list.
Awesome. Also, hit reply to those emails and let EC know what you'd like us to talk about in future episodes, because that's also very helpful.
Yes.
Whether it's a specific question or just an area of conversation, I think we'd also appreciate that. So thank you everybody out there in advance for those questions, for those ideas. They help us make the show, and they help us make a show that you actually want to listen to. So thank you. Do make sure you are subscribed wherever you're listening or watching this so you don't miss another episode. EC and I will be back for a new episode of The Consistency Project next week.